Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, but more specifically, we're going to be discussing the outlook of the Ether Bitcoin valuation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. You'll get access to the website, which has social statistics, derivatives data, on-chain data, of course, for Ethereum as well. And quite a bit more. So make sure you check it out. That sale is going to end tomorrow. Now, I like to go through the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation fairly frequently because I do think it is an important concept to really understand in crypto, is that valuing assets against their Bitcoin pairs makes a lot of sense, okay? For instance, in a bull market, you expect things to sort of appreciate against the US dollar, but if Bitcoin outperforms them, then there really is no point. There's a lot of altcoins that can go up in a bull market, but many of them actually don't keep up with Bitcoin. Now, you're probably scratching your head thinking that everything outperformed Bitcoin, but that's not actually true. A lot of relics, especially from the last market cycle, did not outperform Bitcoin and frankly have no business outperforming Bitcoin. But regardless, Ethereum is one of those ones that tends to really outperform Bitcoin in a bull market. But in these bear markets, it tends to underperform Bitcoin. So I wanted to provide an update because it has been a while, specifically since we spoke about the Ether Bitcoin valuation. Now, when we first started talking about the Ether Bitcoin outlook for going forward, we put out some videos earlier this year on the Ethereum valuation against Bitcoin, looking like it's some type of Wyckoff distribution. I know a lot of people are familiar with Wyckoff distribution after what happened in early 2021, where Bitcoin saw those four peaks, and then ultimately it came back down. And we talked about this back on April 21st. Back then, the Ether Bitcoin valuation was at around 0.0737, and I think that since then, the Ether Bitcoin valuation has fallen quite a bit, but it still is at 0.0537. So still relatively elevated, even though I think from the last time from when we first started talking about this, this outlook of it heading down, it is currently down about 27% right now. So then it sort of begs the question, well, is the outlook still the same, or has it changed now that the market has been deflating over the last several months? And that was several months ago. Now, my outlook personally has not changed, okay? And the reason is for many, actually. There's many reasons. One reason is because I don't think that we can look at this and say that this is like the completion of this Wyckoff distribution. Again, we had those four peaks, and we've had that initial move down. I do think this will ultimately continue. Now, one of the sort of disappointing things about bear markets is that I can put out the same analysis over and over and say that I think it's going to head down, but I also understand that some people feel somewhat like they're Ethereum bulls and they want to only hear about the price going up, especially against Bitcoin, right? They want to hear that it's only going to ever go up. Unfortunately, it is important to stay objective, and while I do like Ethereum, and I think Ethereum is going to be valued much higher later on once we get into the next bull market, we also know that it is important to stick to the data, even if it's not what we want to hear. That's the hard thing. So even when Ether was at 0.073 or whatever it was, and we talked about this idea of Wyckoff distribution, and then we put out another video saying the same thing, standing on a cliff in May of 2022. It was still at like 0.07 something. Now that we've fallen some of that distance, I do think it's important always, of course, to sort of reassess. But when I look at this, I still can't help but think that it ultimately needs to continue going down. And apart from the whole Wyckoff distribution stuff, which again is a little bit hand wavy and not necessarily the most like data centric view or sort of pattern seeking view, one of the things we do know about Ethereum is that it is very seasonal against Bitcoin, not only in a bull market or a bear market per se, but also just during the time of the year. It's very seasonal against Bitcoin, with the exception of 2021. So that's one thing that I should say. One of the things you'll recognize, this is the Ether Bitcoin valuation, is that during the second half of the year, the Ether Bitcoin valuation tends to go down. Okay, so this was in 2015. And then here, the move down actually started all the way back in March. But you can see that it really continued throughout the rest of the year until the end of the year, right? Until really December of 2016. And then we had another move up in June of 2017. It had this peak, and it really it moved down until the end of the year. Even at that point, right? You can see it moved down until the end of the year. And it wasn't until the following year, January, sometimes the move starts in December for Ethereum, okay? So for instance, you had this nice, manic move by the Ether Bitcoin valuation in early 2016. You had it again in early 2017. And then again, you had it even in 2018, which was the start of the bear market. What's interesting is you'll still see this move even in bear markets, right? But it can be somewhat mitigated when the market is not overwhelmingly bullish, like when we're in the middle of a bear market. You can see here that even over here in 2018, the Ether Bitcoin valuation only really did well in the early part of the year, and then it spent the rest of the year dropping. Again, even in 2019, which was sort of like an off and on year for Bitcoin, the Ether Bitcoin valuation went up, but then, it sort of held steady for a while, but then it ultimately ended up going down and then staying relatively suppressed until January of the following year. And then it started going back up. And then that move, by the way, in January of 2020, it was still a 60% move. We were sort of just getting started. I don't know if many people remember the video we did back in the end of December of 2020, but we said, remember the end of December. It was actually a video title. And it was after the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation had basically spent, the latter half of 2020 falling to the tune of 40%. Again, Ether Bitcoin going down in the latter half of the year. Now, where this pattern breaks down, or where it has broken down, was last year when it actually just went sideways. Rather than going up or down, we ultimately just went sideways. And really, even going into January, it also sort of, that pattern of seeing a move up also broke down. Regardless, I think it would likely make the most sense, and I said this months ago as well, to just assume that this is an outlier. And I'm operating under the assumption that the Ether Bitcoin valuation will likely continue to head down, probably off and on, for the rest of the year, okay? I know that sounds crazy, and I know as someone who really likes Ethereum and who thinks Ethereum will ultimately do really well, it can be a tough thing to hear, where I constantly just say, look, I'm not bullish on the Ether Bitcoin valuation right now, but once we get closer to the end of the year, my tune will probably start to change. So unfortunately, 2022, does, and it has been, and it continues to be, a very bearish year, not only for crypto, but also for the stock market as well. And so I'm still expecting the Ether Bitcoin valuation to ultimately depreciate further. Okay, that's sort of my baseline assumption, and that it will likely continue to decrease off and on throughout the remainder of the year. But then hopefully as we get into later on into the next bull market, we'll find some really great opportunities on the Ether Bitcoin valuation. In fact, the very first video on my channel is about the Ether Bitcoin valuation, and it was right here where it was called Timing the Long-Term Momentum Shift. Okay, and then these videos I've been putting out are sort of timing it up here, but going back to the downside. So I'm going to be very interested when I think that we're at a point where the momentum is shifting back towards Ethereum, okay? But unfortunately, I don't think we've reached that point yet, okay? I don't think the momentum of the market is switching back to Ethereum. And again, I'm not talking about its USD valuation. This is one of these videos where I'm strictly speaking about Ethereum's valuation against Bitcoin. So there does exist a scenario where Bitcoin USD could go up and Ether USD could go up, but Ether Bitcoin could still bleed. And the reason that is because I just think the market is very bearish. And when we're in a bearish market like the one we're currently in, you typically see most everything underperform Bitcoin off and on. Now, I have seen some people say, well, this is not true, and that a lot of altcoins are outperforming Bitcoin. I would argue that it's easy to cherry pick, right? Like, it's easy to go cherry pick whatever the most recent local low is on a cryptocurrency and say, well, it's up 9% over the last, few weeks, right? It's up 9%. Or to even go to other, to go, I don't really consider Ether an alt, to be completely honest, but, you go look at other altcoins, right? And you can cherry pick all you want and say, well, technically, ADA Bitcoin is up 40%. Or, I'm sure Link Bitcoin is up a little bit, right? I mean, Link Bitcoin is up, 40, 50% from the local bottom. Solana Bitcoin is up, from the local bottom to the tune of 60%. The problem is, you look at all of these charts and they're still in macro downtrends, right? Like, yes, we've seen a bounce off a local bottom. We also saw a bounce off a local bottom here, and this did not mean that this was a new trend, right? Just like this one does not mean that this is a new trend. So I go back, I ultimately go back and I say, well, as much as I would like for Ethereum to sort of start to show strength, I don't think it's quite yet time, okay? Not against Bitcoin. I think that this thing is going to have to work itself out a bit longer. And my plan is once we get closer to the end of the year, I will start to see, okay, where is the Ether Bitcoin valuation, and is it starting to look a bit more appetizing from a risk management perspective, okay? Now, some of the biggest counter arguments that I see are things like, well, you're not talking about the merge and you're talking about all this stuff. And I've said before, I do think that's only going to bring uncertainty into a very uncertain market. It's not like if the merge just magically happened without any issues whatsoever, that Ethereum would just go on a mind-bending rally just simply because the merge occurred when all of crypto is in a crypto winter, okay? I mean, imagine the merge happened a year ago. It's not, I mean, Ethereum would likely just be in the same crypto winter that every other crypto asset is in. So I don't think it's right to say that that's going to save Ethereum from experiencing the same type of crypto winter that all these other cryptocurrencies are experiencing. So I would say that. I would also say, say that from a regulatory perspective, Bitcoin is clearly the safest. After Bitcoin, probably ETH, honestly. And I mean, I'm looking forward to, honestly, for some of these regulations to come out so that we have a better understanding of how these assets are going to be viewed, so that we don't have to constantly wonder, is it a security or is it not? So for me, I look at this market and I know it's not a popular theory, right? Like, I'm not claiming that it's not, but I'm not here to be popular, right? I mean, certainly my channel is not a popularity contest. But I look at this. I look at this valuation, this Ether Bitcoin trend, compare it to what we've previously seen with Ethereum, and say, you know what? It kind of sucks, right? Like, it kind of sucks right now. But we also do know that it's a very seasonal thing, and that while it is in one of these macro downtrends right now, we eventually will very likely hit some type of a macro bottom, and then we'll hopefully time that momentum shift back the other direction, right? So we have this momentum shift here. We have this momentum shift back to the downside. Unfortunately, I did not get that one. But, I'm trying to focus on sometime, my guess, if I were to just sort of speculate here off the cuff, my guess is that we'll see some type of a local bottom on the Ether Bitcoin pair, maybe by the later part of this year, but it's not necessarily a macro bottom. This macro bottom occurred about half a year after Bitcoin USD bottomed. So I would say it could be a macro bottom depending on how bad it is, but I would argue I'm looking for a local bottom by the end of this year, and hopefully some type of double bottom or a lower low, sort of like what we saw over here, right? Like, we had a low in December 2018 and then a lower low in middle of 2019. So I'm potentially looking for something similar, right? Like a low the end of this year, and either a double bottom in 2023 or a lower low by mid 2023, and then hopefully we gear back up for the next bull market. Okay. Now, the biggest question mark, of course, is, well, what happens if we're out in 2024 and the market still looks bad, like the macro still looks bad? 2024 is still a ways off, so why don't we let tomorrow worry about itself? But for now, I do think it probably makes the most sense to just assume the Ether Bitcoin valuation is going to bleed. And it pains me to say it because, I mean, I am an Ether bull, like, through and through on the macro, from like a 10-year horizon, of course, or even a 4-year horizon. But in the short term, unfortunately, it's not the case. So, as I've said before, and by the way, remember, we have Into the Cryptoverse Premium. That sale will end in tomorrow, so go check it out. But as I've said before, with regards to the Ether Bitcoin valuation, I do think it eventually will turn back around and start heading back up, right? We will reach a day where I do believe that will happen. But unfortunately, that day is not today. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. We still have the sale going on into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.